And we discussed the secondary sexual organs, the system of ducts, and that includes the vagina, the uterus, the uterine ducts. And we discussed puberty and menopause. And now our next topic is oogenesis. Oogenesis and the sexual cycle. So the least complex of those is oogenesis. The sexual cycle, I'll stop after the oogenesis lecture, and then we'll look at an animation of how two phases occur together, the menstrual phase and the ovarian phase, the two cycles, ovarian cycle, menstrual cycle. So let's start with oogenesis. So there's a reproductive cycle. Those are the events occurring between fertilization and birth. The sexual cycle are events occurring every month when pregnancy does not occur. There are two parts of that. The ovarian cycle, that happens in the ovaries, and the menstrual cycle. And that parallels changes that occur in the uterus. So let's look at oogenesis, part of the cycle. And this occurs, of course, in the primary organ, the ovaries. Two things must develop, the follicles and the eggs. In any given month, about 25 to 27 follicles and ova develop to certain stages, but only one usually is ovulated. But of course, two can be ovulated, which results in dizygotic twins, possibly. So the development of the egg is known as oogenesis. Just like the spermatogonia in males that are the germ cells in females are called oogonia. And they go through mitosis. One cell, one daughter cell remains in the system, but one becomes the primary oocyte. Then, so that happens before birth. Before birth, there are primary oocytes. And then nothing happens until adolescence, all the way to menopause. So after birth, once a month, the follicles and the ova will go through development. The ova will go through meiosis 1 and 2. Meiosis 1 is the same no matter if it's spermatogenesis or oogenesis. There is one difference, however. So you go through all the phases, the prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, all those four phases. But when the two secondary oocytes occur, one disintegrates. It's called the first polar body. And one reason is thought that the one remaining oocyte, is also a name for egg, has a lot of cytoplasm and a lot of organelles like mitochondria. And so that if it is fertilized, there's lots of nutrition there for the first stages of development, the first mitoses of development. So yeah, the first polar body dies, but the secondary oocyte is ovulated. And it doesn't go through meiosis 2 unless it's fertilized, interestingly. So if there's no fertilization, then the egg just decomposes and is resorbed in its parts. But if fertilization occurs, then meiosis 2 continues. And with meiosis 2, there's another division, of course, in this case producing two daughter cells. One of those daughter cells does become the second polar body, which dies and is decomposed and resorbed. But the other one, the other daughter cell, is fertilized, after which it's known as a zygote, and it will continue on to be an embryo. So what happens with the follicle? Before birth, there's just all these primordial follicles. I think it's what we say 1.5 million or so, but by puberty, there are only about 400,000 left. And the primary follicle, which with its granulosa cells surrounding it, which will eventually produce hormones and also partly become the corpus luteum. So it grows in size, accumulates more fluid, and eventually has so much fluid that it bursts. And that is ovulation. So that's when the egg is released. Then it becomes the corpus luteum. Yeah, so let me write down some notes for that, these processes. Oogenesis. It's a monthly event. It produces one haploid egg. Remember, it's the first meiosis 1, that divides the homologous chromosomes. Therefore, the resultant secondary oocyte is haploid. Yeah, so at birth, approximately 1.5 million exist, but many or most degenerate by puberty. At which time approximately 400,000 remain. So what stimulates the completion of meiosis 1? Follicle stimulating hormone. Meiosis 1 produces, whoops, no, it doesn't produce, whoops. Meiosis 1 produces a secondary oocyte and polar body. We should say first polar body, I guess, first polar body. And after fertilization, meiosis 2 completes, producing the fertilized egg and the second polar body. The remaining zygote contains the cytoplasm and organelles from the mother, which provides enough cytoplasm for early stages of development. And we'll get into that again, but say that is the zygote. And it goes through division now by mitosis, divides again. This will be 4 times now, or 8 resultants. So the area doesn't get any bigger at first. So these new cells all get the cytoplasm from the original one. Yeah. So the next cycle we're going to talk about is the sexual cycle. And for that, I'd like you to watch an animation before we get into it. So I'm going to stop the lecture here.